On December 4th, 2018, Matt Jackson of the Young Bucks sent out this tweet. Cash Wheeler of the team formerly known as the Revival would then respond with this tweet. And almost 2 full years after these tweets were sent out, the Young Bucks and FTR delivered on their promise. The dream match between these two amazing tag teams finally took place at Full Gear 2020, and the wrestling world rejoiced. Very rarely does a dream match that has such unrealistically high expectations set upon it by fans deliver in this day and age. But the Young Bucks and FTR truly outdid themselves this time and delivered an all-time classic match. The reason why this match was so good was because it was a love letter to tag team wrestling, and it was a masterpiece that only the two best tag teams in the world could have put together. This is Tranquilo Club, and this is the beauty of the Young Bucks versus FTR. Over the past decade, no tag team was considered the best in the business more than the Young Bucks. They truly stood out in an era where tag team wrestling seemed to be dying, but it wasn't dying. Teams like the Young Bucks were in other promotions making sure the spirit of tag team wrestling was still well and alive. And that's why they earned the reputation of the best tag team in the world, because they went from promotion to promotion, from country to country to prove there was still plenty of life left in tag team wrestling. They were on top of the wrestling world. That is, until the golden era of NXT happened. NXT, unlike its main roster counterpart, really gave a shine on tag team wrestling. And how could they not? They had amazing tag teams like DIY, American Alpha, and another tag team that went by the name of The Revival. These three teams had a series of matches where they made a name for themselves, and they really helped put NXT on the map. But the Revival in particular were the tag team that were receiving plenty of acclaim because of their old school look and old school style of wrestling. They really stood out in an era where the in-ring product had evolved so much over the past few years. And they did it by being a throwback tag team inspired by the likes of Arn and Tully and the Midnight Express. But because they were putting on such great matches, classic matches, despite their gimmick, a lot of people considered the Revival the best tag team in the world. And after their run in NXT, they sure as hell had a claim to that moniker. Enter the Young Bucks. Matt and Nick Jackson, who in their minds felt they were the best tag team in the world, were clearly bothered and caught off guard by the rise of the Revival. And they kinda had a reason to be bothered by it. I mean, by that point, the Young Bucks had been all over the world proving why they were being considered the best tag team in the world. They had over a decade's worth of matches and accomplishments under their belts. But the Revival received all the praise and all the acclaim because, let's face it, they were on WWE TV. They just had more eyeballs on them than the Young Bucks would ever have. And that's not to discredit the Revival's work. They certainly earned to be in the conversation for best tag team in the world. But they simply had the advantage as far as exposure goes just due to the fact that they worked for WWE. And thus, an internet rivalry was born. The Young Bucks and the entirety of the Elite began to take shots at the Revival both on Twitter and on their YouTube series Being the Elite, with some shots being subtle and some being as on the nose can get. The Young Bucks made it clear, the Revival were now their biggest competitors. And this rivalry quickly caught on with internet wrestling fans. And the Young Bucks, as they always do, turned this into a massive marketing strategy. They quickly became synonymous with 3 letters, FTR. And it seemed as if the tables began to turn. The Young Bucks grew in popularity, and the Revival began to lose theirs. But that wasn't due to any fault of their own. The Revival became victims of another popular NXT act being ruined completely on the main roster. While the Revival were floundering on the main roster, the Young Bucks were putting together the largest independent wrestling show along with other members of the Elite. And that show ended up being so successful, it arguably led to the creation of All Elite Wrestling. So while the Young Bucks were helping to spearhead this brand new wrestling promotion, becoming executive vice presidents in said wrestling promotion. The Revival were being humiliated on a weekly basis on WWE TV. Eventually, the Revival became so frustrated with the way they were being used by WWE that they reportedly asked for their releases, but they would be denied their releases multiple times by WWE. The Revival would end up staying with WWE for over another year despite asking for their releases. They would surprisingly be on TV for the rest of the year more often than not, but it wasn't until they made it clear to WWE officials that they had no plan in resigning that they were finally taken off TV. And finally, 2 months later, on April 10th, 2020, the Revival were granted their releases by WWE, an entire 15 months after they had first asked for their release. Wrestling fans rejoiced as they assumed there was one place that they were most likely to go. It was a matter of when, and not if, that they would show up at AEW. Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood would make their AEW debuts on Dynamite episode after Double or Nothing 2020, now going by the name of FTR, and they made their debut in a way that no one would have ever guessed. They saved the Young Bucks from an attack by the Butcher and the Blade, and after that save, it's for the first time that the Young Bucks and FTR came face to face. After all the years of going back and forth on social media, and both tag teams claiming to be the best in the world, the wrestling world realized that the biggest tag team dream match was finally upon us. But in classic AEW fashion, they told a long-term story before getting to the match, and it was one of absolute heartbreak. In short, FTR manipulated Hangman Page to break up the Elite from the inside in order to become AEW Tag Team Champions. At All Out 2020, FTR's master plan came to fruition. And if you want a full detailed breakdown of that story, which also includes the Young Bucks, no need to worry, I made a video about it, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description below for you. So after FTR became AEW Tag Team Champions, this sent the Young Bucks back to the drawing board. What did they have to do to become the Tag Team Champions in the company that they're helping to run? Seeing FTR become Tag Team Champions in AEW was arguably the straw that broke the camel's back for the Young Bucks. Here's a tag team that they mocked for years, that they laughed at, that they started a movement against, who just 1 year ago were being humiliated on a weekly basis on TV. And they walk into your promotion and they become the Tag Team Champions before you do. Frankly, this was enough for the Young Bucks. They finally snapped and they went back to their heel roots. They embraced the cocky attitude that once helped them conquer tag team wrestling around the world. And it ended up working in their favor as they won a #1 contenders match on Dynamite in a fatal 4-way tag team match. And thus the biggest tag team dream match in the modern era of professional wrestling was set. After months of build-up and teasing and trash talk, the Young Bucks were set to face FTR at Full Gear for the tag team titles. The two best tag teams in the world going at it for the most prestigious tag team titles in all of wrestling. It doesn't get better than this. On a pay-per-view that was absolutely incredible, the Young Bucks and FTR still managed to outperform everybody. With all the pressure in the world, these two tag teams proved why they're the best in the world. The Young Bucks, the high-flying team who best represent the modern era, versus FTR, the hard-hitting, old-school team who are a throwback to the older eras. It was a clash of styles, a clash of ideologies, but most importantly, it was a love letter to tag team wrestling. The story these two tag teams told in the ring was a thing of beauty. It was a masterclass. It was an interesting dynamic because in the lead up to this match, FTR had injured Matt Jackson's ankle, and this was a crucial blow to the Young Bucks since they're so reliant on their quick feet to dominate matches. But regardless, this didn't stop Matt Jackson from starting off the match. But right from the beginning, FTR started attacking Matt Jackson's injured ankle, and it's not until a few minutes into the match that the Young Bucks get an equalizer. This happens when Dax Harwood throws a punch at Matt Jackson while he's leaning on the outside on the steel frame of the turnbuckle. But Matt ends up ducking out of the way, therefore Dax throws a full force punch at the steel frame of the turnbuckle, injuring his hand in the process. So that means that both tag teams are now essentially even. The high-flying team has a guy with an injured leg, and the hard-hitting team has a guy with an injured hand. So whichever team wins this match is gonna have to by getting creative. And that's when the beauty of this match truly comes in, because both teams do end up getting creative. From here on out, it's classic tag team wrestling with blending of the new age and the old age as well. And this is never more evident than a moment in the match where both tag teams pay tribute to the teams that influence them. FTR pay tribute to the Hart Foundation and the Steiner brothers, while the Young Bucks pay tribute to the Hardy brothers and the Dudley boys. It's a great moment in the match, and it's a tribute to all the teams that paved the way for these two teams to go at it on such a big stage. And another huge contributor to why this match felt as big as it did was because of the 1,000 fans in attendance. For such a small crowd, they really made a difference, and they made the moment feel so much bigger. And all the wrestlers involved did so well to play to the crowd. Matt Jackson and Dax Harwood played off their injuries so well. The two of these men basically wrestled this match while missing a limb. But full credit to their partners as well. Cash Wheeler and Nick Jackson put in a shift. And they had to, considering they didn't have the injuries that their partners did. That was the beauty of this. There was depth to this match. AEW is really good at rewarding the viewer if they know the history of the wrestlers, but they do it in a way to not throw off people who don't know the history of the wrestlers. A great example of this is in the third act of the match where FTR decide to hit Matt Jackson with the meeting in the middle, which is the finisher used by the team of Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa, DIY, who are FTR's great rivals from their days in NXT. And it's even better because it's acknowledged by commentary, which is rare for a major wrestling promotion in America. As a viewer, you feel rewarded for actually knowing where these wrestlers came from. And then on the other side, you have the Young Bucks paying tribute once again to one of their great rivals, the Golden Lovers. And because of moments like that, for hardcore wrestling fans, especially hardcore tag team wrestling fans, this match was a masterpiece. And all these callbacks lead to what in my opinion was a great finish. Towards the end of the match, FTR removed Matt Jackson's boot to expose his ankle and attack it. Harwood would then put Matt Jackson in an inverted ankle lock. Nick Jackson would then save his brother, but afterwards Cash Wheeler would take him out with a super kick. Wheeler would then tag in and super kick Matt Jackson while he was on his knees. He has the match won at this point, but for whatever reason he doesn't go for the pin. Wheeler then steps out onto the apron and he looks at a defeated Matt Jackson. He then grabs the ropes and jumps on it and hits a 450 splash, but it ends up backfiring as Matt Jackson moves out of the way and he sees an opening to go for the super kick with his exposed foot to get the win. The Young Bucks finally become AEW Tag Team Champions, and they did so by defeating FTR in a match that was years in the making. And in an unfortunate turn of events, FTR, who had made it known for years that they were no flips, just fists, ended up losing the biggest match of their career the one time that they went for a flip. And the Young Bucks came out on top in a match where they weren't allowed to do as many flips as they would normally like to due to Matt Jackson's injury. It was a beautiful piece of ironic storytelling thrown into this brilliant match that was already great on the storytelling. Basically, both teams got out of their comfort zone, but only one was able to prevail. But in doing so, FTR and the Young Bucks delivered an instant classic. After years of teasing and trash talking, these two teams did the impossible. They exceeded these unrealistic expectations that fans had. But most importantly, fans who were following this rivalry throughout the past couple of years were rewarded with a hell of a payoff that was worth the long wait. It's funny when people say that the Young Bucks are incapable of telling a great story in the ring, because in my opinion, they have the 3 best tag team matches in terms of storytelling of the past 5 years. And I only mention the Young Bucks because they're the ones who get all the criticism. Everybody praises FTR because everybody knows how good they are. They are master storytellers, but so are the Young Bucks. In my opinion, these are the 2 best tag teams in the world. They're 1A and 1B, and you can decide what order they're in. But a match this great doesn't just happen because of one team, it's a joint effort. And the effort these 4 men gave at Full Gear 2020 was one for the ages. This is what tag team wrestling is all about. No matter what other promotions will say, they'll say that there's no money in tag team wrestling, but that's just not true, and this match is living proof of that. And I'm a firm believer that the contrasting styles between FTR and the Young Bucks is what made this match so special, because because each team represented a different ideology of wrestling, and the way they presented this in storytelling form within the match was brilliant. From the injuries forcing both teams to think outside of the box, to the tributes to past tag teams within the match, to the subverting of our expectations with that epic ending. And from a pure storytelling standpoint, the Young Bucks finally becoming AEW Tag Team Champions by defeating the team that's been breathing down their necks for the past few years was poetic in a way. After all the heartbreak the Young Bucks went through, including the breakup of the Elite, they finally reached the top of the wrestling mountain in AEW, which they even managed to celebrate with Kenny Omega, with Hangman looming in the shadows. This was the win that the Young Bucks desperately needed. And as for FTR, I can guarantee we haven't seen the last of them as tag team champions. But for now, they can revel in the fact that they, along with the Young Bucks, lived up to the hype and put on one of the best tag team matches of all time.